Now, the book of Daniel, the whole book is a prophecy, and there's several dreams that Daniel has that fit into end time prophecy, and several prophecies he has. This is the 7th chapter, the 11th chapter, and so on. We're not going to have time to get into those. No doubt we may refer back to them. But we want to start with the 9th chapter, because I told you last week the 9th chapter is a skeleton that we put Bible prophecy on. I mean, you get this right, and the rest of prophecy, it fits in. So we want to look at this, and then we're going to move ahead into Bible prophecy. When you look at verse 2, Daniel chapter 9, it says, in the first year of his reign, that was Darius the Mede, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. Now, where did he get that? No doubt he read the prophets that he had, and he had copies of some of the Old Testament prophets. And Jeremiah prophesied during the time just before the captivity, right on up to the captivity. And Jeremiah prophesied of this time that would come, and Daniel read this, and he understood that 70 years had passed, and so it was almost time. If you go back to Jeremiah and chapter 25, you read in the 25th chapter of Jeremiah, all of this refers to Nebuchadnezzar and Babylon, but verse 10 he says, moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth, that's from Babylon, and the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom, and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones, and the light of the candle. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. So right there it is. Jeremiah prophesied that it was going to be 70 years. And this was before the captivity. And then God said he would punish Nebuchadnezzar and that nation that took Israel into captivity. So Daniel was reading this, and he come across this, and he realized the 70 years are almost up. And so something's getting ready to take place. And so Daniel began to pray. And if you read verse 3 through verse 19, you'll find that Daniel prayed, he repented, he confessed his sins, and he confessed the sins of Israel. And it's a good prayer, a good model prayer for us to pray. But he was getting ready for the deliverance that God was going to bring to Israel, and so he was confessing his sin. Now, while he confessed his sin, and while he prayed, and while he went through this, the Bible said in verse 20, while I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God, yea, whiles I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel. Who is Gabriel?
Archangel.
He was an archangel, wasn't he? He was a messenger that came to Mary, remember, and told her she was going to have child. Gabriel came to Daniel, whom I had seen the vision at the beginning, and he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I am now come forth to give thee skill and understanding. At the beginning of thy supplications the commandment came forth, and I am come to show thee, for thou art greatly beloved. Therefore understand the matter and consider the vision. Now listen to this verse. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. You might want to underline thy people in your Bible or make a note of it, because Daniel's people was who? Israelites, the Jews. This has nothing to do with the church. This is Israel. 70 weeks are determined upon thy people, upon Israel, and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Okay, there were 6 things mentioned there that was going to happen during these 70 weeks. First of all, they were for Israel, not for anyone else. They were for the Jewish people. The first 3 things was to finish the transgression. The transgression was finished at Calvary. Okay? That's when the transgression was finished. That's when sin had an end put to it. To make an end of sins, it was done at Calvary's cross. And to make reconciliation for iniquity, we were reconciled at Calvary's cross. Those first 3 things mentioned happened 2,000 years ago at the cross. Okay? The last 3, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy, or the most holy place, that hasn't happened yet. Those 3 things has not happened yet. So this verse is divided. Okay? The cross has divided this verse. To finish the transgression, make an end of sins, make reconciliation for iniquity. Okay? The other part is still yet to come. Okay, and it's still to come on God's people. Verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince, we know that's Christ, don't we? Shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, 62 weeks. The streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. Daniel was thinking about 70 years in captivity. The angel Gabriel gave him 70 sets of 7. He gave him 70 sets of 7 years. Okay? So each one of these weeks that he's talking about represents 7 years. Now, if you're going to get prophecy right, this has to be right. 70 years upon God's people was going to be 70 sets of 7. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, Israel had fallen into gross idolatry. And so God gave them over to an idolatrous nation until they were sick of it. Okay? But also, in Leviticus, God had told Israel in chapter 25 and 26, God had told Israel every 7th year let the land rest. He would provide enough store to come in the 6th year so that the land could rest the 7th year, they could sow the 8th year, and the 9th year the store would come in. Now this was God's command. Just as a Sabbath rest every week, just as there was a year of Jubilee, the land had to rest every 7th year. Now Israel disobeyed that. When they got in the land, they went 490 years without letting the land rest. And they went ahead and farmed it on the 7th year, just like they did on the 6th year. And that added up in 490 years, divided by 7 is 70 years, isn't it? And so Israel went into captivity. That number 70 was so the land could rest 70 years and enjoy her Sabbaths until that was fulfilled, and then they could come back. Okay? So that was the reason for that. And that's why they had to go for 70 years. Now, notice that here comes the timeline. This starts Bible prophecy. This is where it begins. In verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, 49 years, and 62 weeks, 434 years. The streets shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And we know that's true. If you turn back with me to Nehemiah, Ezra and then Nehemiah, you'll find where this actually took place. In Nehemiah, the 2nd chapter, Nehemiah had graduated to cupbearer in Artaxerxes' kingdom. And it was still Persia, but it was Artaxerxes was on the throne. And that meant he tasted the wine before Artaxerxes did to make sure it wasn't poison. So I don't know if that was a graduation or not. But anyway, he was the cupbearer. And in December, the word came to Nehemiah from people in Jerusalem that the wall was broken down, that the place was a mess and it was tore up. And Nehemiah got this great burden for it. So he began to pray, and he prayed for 4 months. And then in the year Nisan, or the month Nisan, which is April, our April, it was nice. And it came to pass in the month Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes the king, that wine was before him. I took up the wine and gave it unto the king. Now I had not been before time sad in his presence. If you were sad in the presence of the king without any reason, off went your head. Wherefore the king said unto me, why is thy countenance sad, seeing thou art not sick? This is nothing else but sorrow of heart. Then I was very sore afraid, and said to the king, let the king live forever. Why should not my countenance be sad, when the city, the place of my father's sepulchres, lieth waste, and the gates thereof are consumed with fire? Then the king said unto me, for what dost thou make request? So I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said unto the king, if it please the king, and if thy servant have found favor in thy sight, that thou wouldest send me unto Judah, unto the cities of my father's sepulchres, that I may build it. And the king said unto me, the queen also sitting by him, for how long shall thy journey be, And when wilt thou return? So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. So there in Nisan, and I believe it was the 14th of Nisan. I believe it was right down to the day. But it was right to the month when Nehemiah was commanded by Artaxerxes to go and build the walls. Now, Ezra had gone back almost 80 years before, and Zerubbabel to build the temple in the book of Ezra. But Nehemiah was going back to build the walls and to build the street. And so he starts his trip back toward Jerusalem. Now, let's set a date, because during this time, when Artaxerxes gave this commandment to Nehemiah, it was 454 BC. That was when this commandment came forth. 454 BC. Okay? Now, they go back, they build the wall in troublous times. It takes 7 weeks or 49 years. And then there are 62 weeks added to that. Notice verse 25. Understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, 454, unto the Messiah the Prince, that's Christ, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. 62 times 7 is what? 434, right? You can check my math if you want to. 434 years passed between the commandment to go forth and to Messiah. Okay? After 434 years, Messiah appears. Now, this is 62 weeks. The street was built in 7 weeks, 49 years. Okay? $483 years. So from the time of the commandment of Artaxerxes to Nehemiah to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Christ appeared was exactly 483 years. Okay? Now notice the rest of this verse. After 62 weeks, after the 69 weeks, shall Messiah be cut off. That's what? Crucifixion, right? He was crucified, but not for himself. He wasn't crucified for his own sins. He was crucified for our sins. Okay? So, from this time of the commandment until Christ was crucified was exactly 483 years. Now, if you look, the very month that Christ was crucified was a month Nisan. You can say Nisan, but it's Nisan. Nisan was when Artaxerxes gave the commandment. Nisan was when Christ was crucified. The Passover took place on the 14th of Nisan. Okay? Jesus sat down with his 12, you remember, on the 14th that evening. Later was taken. The next day was still Nisan, because from 6 to 6 was their day, from sundown to sundown. He was crucified on the 14th of Nisan. This commandment came forth in Nice, and again, I believe it was the 14th of Nice, and I don't think God barely gets prophecy. I don't think he almost gets it. I think he perfectly gets prophecy, right down to the hour. And so 483 years pass, Christ is crucified, and of course raises from the dead. So this prophecy, and Daniel was prophesying during Darius' reign about 500 BC. So there's no way he could have known any of this. But yet he prophesied right down to the minute when Jesus Christ was crucified. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Is this making sense? Okay. Some of these verses are hard, so we'll try to go slow, and if you have a question, we'll try to answer it. But verse 26, he's crucified, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. There'll be wars and rumors of war right to the end. But here, the end comes with a flood of Romans. There was between 500,000 and 1 million Romans that come into Jerusalem and destroyed the city. If you look in Matthew 24, I believe it's verse 2, the disciples was telling him about the stones in the building, and Jesus said, you see these stones, there'll not be one stone left upon another that shall not be torn down. That happened when the Romans came in and destroyed the city and destroyed the temple. And they literally leveled the city and they leveled the temple. And this was fulfillment. It was in 70 AD. Now, you know, Jesus was very, does anybody need this up? Jesus was very merciful because he died in most scholars saying 29 AD. Okay? And again, if you put 454, you're going to come up with 483 years, okay, from that commandment, from Artaxerxes. But the temple and Jerusalem wasn't destroyed till 70 AD. What the Lord did was gave the apostles and the prophets 40 years to testify to Israel, to preach to them, to give them the gospel, to give them an opportunity to receive Christ. And even after all they'd seen, they crucified the Lord, and all they'd seen in the apostles, they still did not see Christ in their preaching. They were blind. And so 70 AD came, and when 70 AD came, Vespasius Titus was his name. He came in and he destroyed the city. And I mean, he destroyed everything. He leveled the place. There's nothing left. All the stones, everything was gone. Now, as I said, the Lord prophesied it would happen. It happened like that. We talked about John the Apostle last week, and John was still alive. He witnessed this. He knew about this. He wrote Revelation in probably 96 AD, so the gospel was committed to the 7 churches, and he knew about this. What happened to these Jews? When the Romans destroyed and killed hundreds of thousands of Jews, they took over 10,000 Jews into captivity, and they took them down to Rome, and there in Rome, 10,000 Jews, along with other slaves, built what we know as a Colosseum. They labored until they died. I mean, they literally just died as they worked. And they didn't care. The Romans didn't care. They were slave labor. They were going to kill them, and they worked them to death. And so this begins the final dispersion. And dispersion is a scattering out. The Jews were scattered out. They had come back under Ezra and Nehemiah for a short time, but now under Roman domination, and then the Romans coming and sacking the city, the Jews were spread into all countries. And that's where they are up until this present time. Now we're going to talk about that as we get into it, how they're coming back and how God is drawing them back to the land of the Bible. And Bible prophecy has been fulfilled even as we speak, as they go back. But they were spread out, they were dispersed, they were gone. So there were no temple for them to worship. They worshiped in their little churches in Asia Minor, and churches where they could set them up, and in synagogues where they could build them, but there was no temple worship. Now, look at verse 26 again. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So we know who did that, don't we? It was the Romans. They destroyed it. But it says the people of the prince that shall come. And then in verse 27, and he is the prince that shall come. He is yet to come. Who is this prince? This prince is the Antichrist, isn't he? He is the one that will rise up again and will rule the world. And as a matter of fact, we're getting very close to that right now. But according to this verse, the people of the prince that shall come, he has ties with Rome, doesn't he? Either he is a Roman citizen, or he has ties with the Roman Pope. It's one or the other, because the people of the prince that shall come were Romans. And so he has to have Roman ties. There is a good possibility that this man will come out of Italy. And there's a good possibility, according to Daniel chapter 7, that he will be the little horn that will break off 3 of the horns, and one will come up in its place. He'll unite 3 nations, and he'll say, you see how good this worked for us? We united 3 nations, and it's working economically, it's working militarily, it's working, we're getting along. So this is a good model for the whole world. It's very possible that's what will happen. Now, I'm not dogmatic about that. I can't be. But there is the possibility that this man will come out of Rome. Okay? We know that we have a Roman Pope. He is supposed to be the last Pope. Pope Francis. And he is doing things that the other popes haven't done. He is liberal. He is trying to unite Islam with Catholicism. He is breaking all the traditions that Rome has held through the years, and he's making new ones. He's a modern pope, and the world is ready for a modern pope to accept him. So this pope could very well be the pope that goes into the tribulation. Okay? Now, notice verse 27. He, that is the Antichrist, shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. He is going to sign an agreement with the Jewish people for a week. And remember what a week is. 7 years, isn't it? So 7 years, he's saying we're going to have peace. We're going to get along with all other nations. I'm going to build you a temple. And Israel actually thinks they have their Messiah on the throne. They think he is the Messiah. And as we get into Revelation, we're going to find out that the Jew is actually going to join in the persecution of true believers because they think their Messiah is on the throne and anybody else is not real, is not the Messiah. And so they are going to join in the persecution of real believers, okay, during the tribulation period. But for 3.5 years, for 1 week, in the midst of the week, 3.5 years have gone by. In the middle of that 7 years, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. He's going to stop all sacrifices. He's going to say, that's it, Israel. No more sacrifices. No more lambs. No more rams. It's over. You cannot sacrifice anymore. He's going to enter into the temple, and as we're going to find in Revelation, he's going to declare himself to be God. He's going to say he is God. He is going to worship the God of forces and the God of nature, not the God of the Bible. And he is going to make war with anyone that goes against him. And so the Jews' eyes will be open in the middle of the week, in the middle of the 7 years, and they're going to say, wait a minute, our Messiah would never do this. He wouldn't do this. And so God is going to intervene and miraculously protect the nation Israel from the wrath of the Antichrist. What we're going to have set up in Jerusalem, and he will move his headquarters from Rome, I believe, to Jerusalem. We're going to have the Antichrist that will be calling the shots, that will declare himself to be God. We're going to have the false prophet, which I believe is the Pope. He is going to be the false prophet that calls fire down from heaven and works hand in hand with the Antichrist. And then we're going to have the beast, or the world system, made up of 10 nations that will give their power for 1 hour to the Antichrist. So you see the Trinity here? You see this false Trinity? Father, Son, Holy Ghost, Antichrist, false prophet, and beast. Satan is going to try to imitate everything that God has done. And he's going to do it in those last 3.5 years in the great, what is called the Great Tribulation. Israel's eyes is open. God is going to provide for them a place, and we will talk about that. But for the overspreading of abominations, all of the abominations this man is going to commit, he shall make it desolate. The temple will be desolate because of what the Antichrist does, even until the consummation, till the end of all things, until Christ comes back and restores order and puts the Antichrist down and judges the nations. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So you see, what we have is this time schedule that started back in Artaxerxes' time. And that's when the prophetic clock started. And it has come up to the 69th week. Now, 69 weeks have passed. Well, you say, well, where's the 70th week? Why isn't there a 70th week? Remember that verse in 24? 70 weeks are determined upon thy people. This is Israel. The 70 weeks is not to the Gentiles. It's to Israel. When Christ rose again from the dead, Israel was cut off. They were blinded. And they will continue to be blinded until Jesus comes again in His second coming to open their eyes. They can't see until then. They won't be able to see as a nation. They cannot understand that Christ has already come. But between the 69th and 70th week is a special time that God is calling out His church. Jew, Gentile, bond, and free. He's calling out from all nations those that will believe on Him and those that will surrender to Him. That makes up the church. When the church is complete, when it is finished, then Christ will turn back to His people and the 70th week of Daniel. That 70th week is yet to come. It hasn't come yet. In the book of Amos, chapter 9, it says, after this, I will return and will build again the tabernacle of David, which is fallen down. I will set up the ruins thereof. And what he's saying is, after this, after what? After the calling out of the church. After the church has been called out and the last believer is added to the church and the rapture takes place, God is going to turn back to His chosen people, the Jewish nation. And the 70th week of Daniel will begin. When the Antichrist signs this paper and signs this agreement with Israel for 7 years, that begins the tribulation period. That begins the time of the 70 weeks. And that is for the nation Israel. And as we're going to see, they're going to go through pure hell to get to the end. They are going to be persecuted. They're going to, 2/3 of them are going to die. They're going to suffer greatly. But 1/3 is going to come through the fire. And that 1/3 is going to be saved when Jesus comes back the second time. Now, remember we talked last week about the rapture. We're not looking for the second coming. We're not looking for signs to point us to the second coming of Christ. We're looking for the rapture. We're expecting it any day. It could come today. It could come tonight. The rapture could come just like that. But the signs that are in the Bible we're going to talk about are about the second coming of Christ in glory, when every eye shall see Him, and they that pierced Him, and all the world will wail because of Him. That is going to come after the tribulation period. So these verses will kind of give us a skeleton to build on and a time frame that we can go by and know that the rapture hasn't taken place yet. It's going to take place, but we don't know when. But as soon as it does, he'll turn to his ancient people again, and he'll deal with the nation Israel for that last week. And that last week, he'll pour his wrath upon the world, and he'll save his people Israel. Okay, I'm out of time, so we're going to stop right there. Any questions?